IVM.
Paying your credit card bills on time is a great policy. This IPL season, with the Cred Mega Jackpot Week from 27th April to 3rd May, stand a chance to win some fabulous prizes like one Tata Safari car or gold worth 10 lakhs or even one entire Bitcoin worth close to 50 lakhs. Now that is amazing. Don't miss out. Just download Cred.
Welcome to All Things Policy, a daily podcast by the Takshashila Institution. We are a bunch of policy nerds based in Bengaluru, and we like bringing fresh perspectives to Indian affairs and Indian perspectives to global affairs. So grab a cup of coffee, sit back, and join us for today's chat.
Hello and welcome to another episode of All Things Policy. I am Pranay and I am going to be your host for today's episode. I have with me Mihir Mahajan and Shambhavi Naik, and we are going to discuss a topic that is not at all new to all of you. We are discussing about the COVID-19 vaccination strategy. And the background to this discussion is that in September last year, we had come out with a vaccine strategy plan. The aim was we proposed a set of measures in order to get 80% of India vaccinated by December 2021. Now, we know that there have been many changes after that September. Many things have happened. So we thought it would be good to reflect on that strategy again. See what the government has done after that. See what the government has done better or what the government has done worse, and try to suggest some corrective measures so that we can at least get as close to the target of 80% by December 2021 as much as it is possible. So with that as the background, let's begin. So I will link this document that we'd written, and it was an interdisciplinary effort. People from economics, public policy, health and life sciences background and law coming together to write this document. So let's begin with that. Shambhavi, I wanted to ask you that, we wrote that there should be a plan to vaccinate 80% of India's population by December 21. So to start off, how far are we from that target? And what do you think are the implications of this delay, I assume, from a public health angle?
Yeah, I think we are way off target, right? We have just about crossed 17 million vaccinations, like fully vaccinated people in the country. And I mean, forget about our own targets. In January, the health ministry had set a target for itself of 300 million people by July. And considering we are now nearing the end of April, we are definitely looking at a shortfall, right? That it's not going to be easy given the current vaccine shortage also for us to be able to make up those doses and reach 300 million people by July.
Hmm.
So that's, I mean, yeah, clearly we've not done enough. I think, one of our recommendations, and I'm sure we'll speak about it later as well, was to increase manufacturing right from before even we started distribution. And I think that was one key aspect that was ignored, and we can see the impact of that in the current situation. As far as the implications on public health goes, I think we're all living it through at this point of time, right? I I don't know of anybody who might not know of a person in their family or in their close social circle who doesn't have COVID-19. We've all gone through that harrowing kind of experience in the recent past few weeks. And I'm not saying that vaccinations by itself would have obviously kind of completely stopped the second wave, but it could have definitely helped us mitigate the impact of of this wave to a certain extent. We can see what's happening in Israel, right? Albeit a very small population, they went mask free in open places earlier this week, having vaccinated a majority of their population. So clearly, there's much more that we need to do in India.
Right. And with this data coming out about reinfection rates, I guess it's not just important to vaccinate a large number of people, it has also become important to do that in quicker periods of time, right? You can't wait for 1 or 2 years to vaccinate because there will be more people who will get reinfected, right? So I guess from that angle also, we need to quicken the pace. And with that data emerging, we are again having this thread that a slow speed of vaccination might even we might even cover 80% by say next year, but we will still not get out of COVID because of reinfection, right?
Yeah. I mean, so I think there are two things here. One thing that we had considered at that point of time was that when we talk about herd immunity and reaching herd immunity through vaccination, is the fact that 80% of people have to be immune at the same time,
Right.
and hence the urgency in vaccinating 80% as quickly as possible. The other thing which I don't think we had really considered, and perhaps is a lesson for us also, is we hadn't considered that vaccinations might not stop, might only be useful in reducing severity,
Mm.
and might not stop infections and transmissions by itself. Because I think the clinical trials that we were looking at were mainly looking at severity of disease and mortality as an endpoint, and not really mild infections.
Mm.
So that was one point that I don't think we had considered. Again, I think emphasizes the urgency more, because people are still getting infected, which means the virus can still mutate, and mutate away from the current vaccine, right? We can figure out a way to escape the current vaccine. So it actually just, I think, stresses more on the fact that we have to do this as urgently as possible.
Right, right. So let's go through the main stages of the document. So we have recommended a few stages in order to come up with a vaccine strategy plan. The first one was about estimating the need, right? And there, Shambhavi, we had anticipated that supply will be a constraint initially, and hence you'd recommended following an essential first approach. Instead, the government chose to follow a long, drawn out demography first approach. So, could you explain the difference between the two, and how do you think has that strategy played out?
Right. I think choosing that prioritization strategy was an ethical conundrum, because at on one balance you had people who were putting themselves at risk because their occupations required them to be exposed to others, possible COVID-19 carriers, particularly the healthcare workers and the frontline workers. And on the other scale, you had people who we knew at that point of time in that wave were getting more severe form of the disease, which are people over a certain age or people with comorbidities. We chose an essential first kind of approach because it was based on the fact that it was a smaller, well-defined population, so getting them vaccinated could be quicker. And then you could basically open up vaccinations across the pool so that you can vaccinate as many people as quickly as possible. And the other, which I think is now playing out, is as more and more cities and states are considering lockdowns again. The idea was that people who saw us through that first lockdown be vaccinated in preparation for a possible wave of this nature. So now, if you consider the fact that a lot of restaurants have been told to do only takeaways or delivery models and not sitting down, our suggestion was obviously that all people who do these logistics be vaccinated. And now we are in a situation where we have people who will probably be at home are vaccinated, and those on whose shoulders our cities will continue to run won't have a vaccine. So that, I think, that was the kind of thought process that went into picking that essential first approach. And with the demography approach, now we are of course seeing also in the second wave that younger people are also getting the severe form of the diseases, not just the elders. So that it could be an impact of vaccinations. We don't know yet. I don't think we have data to clearly talk about that point. But now we find ourselves in a situation where we have an acute vaccine shortage because we tried to do too many people through a single approach instead of trying to figure out multiple approaches of vaccinating multiple groups of people.
Let me ask this question, Shambhavi, that one of the aims of the demography first approach, the expected outcome was that it could reduce mortality rate and burden of COVID-19 on health services. So, do you see that happening? Is it happened, not happened? Why has that not happened?
Okay. So with the current situation, it is apparent that it has not happened. This could be because of the changes in the virus itself. We are seeing a different kind of impact that the double mutant. Now we are also hearing of a triple mutant is having. It's having more severe form of disease even in younger people. So I don't. I'm not sure whether we could have predicted that. I wouldn't. I wouldn't say that going through a demography approach was I don't think it was an easy choice to make.
Mm.
I don't think anyone would have predicted that the virus will change and completely start attacking a different sort of demography, and we be in that situation. So, yeah, I
Yeah.
wouldn't comment on that.
Yeah, right. I guess the main idea was it was, as you said, it was a conundrum for us as well. But the idea was whether you're following an essential first or a demography first approach, quickly move on to the next stage, which was basically allowing everyone to have the vaccine, right? Everyone who's eligible, so that we can move on to the next stage. I think that has not happened, and we are still stuck in one of the first stages, which was a demography first approach till about March 31st. And that, I guess, is been the big issue.
Yeah, I think so. And I think with opening it up, we could also have decentralized the actual decision making on who gets the vaccine a lot quicker. So I think what we saw with the demography first approach is in a number of places, elders could not get to vaccination centers just because they were alone and they could not manage all the transport. And hence we saw vaccine doses being wasted, right? So
Hmm.
I think a lot of that local context would have been easier to address if we had decentralized that decision.
Absolutely.
I wanted to also point out that when we wrote the document, our estimate for the essential first was about a group of 30 to 50 million people, which would have been 60 million to 100 million doses if you take into account two doses with both the vaccines rolled out in India. Whereas for the demographic first approach with the older population, we had estimated about 120 to 200 million people, which would have been even more number of doses. I think in either case, we are nowhere close to having 60 to 100 million doses becoming available to us. And the speed of rollout has been the problem. I would say, whether you choose the demography first or the essential worker first strategy, the speed of rollout is a very key factor that I think has been missed on. And more than what choice you make, I think the speed was an important thing that should have been there.
Agree. Yeah. So let's come to that point, Mihir. Now that after the first stage, we were discussing about how can we secure vaccine supply, right? And we suggested three pathways for ramping up vaccine supply. So which of them got done? Which of them got left out? And why do you think that happened?
I think just to go through that, I think the three parts that we had really focused on in terms of the securing the supply was one, to strike vaccine technology agreements and attract foreign companies. The second was to incentivize domestic research. And the third was to facilitate domestic vaccine manufacturing. And if you look at all three, I think these were done in part and not done in part. So to kind of talk about striking vaccine technology agreements, I think the positioning of our country and the capability of companies in India to produce vaccines has been recognized globally, and multiple companies, whether it's Serum for the AstraZeneca vaccine as well as the another vaccine, I think it's Novavax, having access to that technology. Or Dr. Reddy is having access to Sputnik. I think that part got done. The fact that our companies were able to were able to kind of get technology from foreign companies that had completed the research and the various trial sets. So I think that part was is very satisfactory to see. I think the second part of what we had said was also to incentivize foreign companies to either manufacture here or sell here. And we were thinking at that time that not all vaccines may be, India may not have enough manufacturing capacity to manufacture all the different vaccines. So we may be able to either attract foreign companies to set up vaccine manufacturing here or import them. I don't think we have achieved that, in the sense that other globally available vaccines like the Pfizer or the Moderna vaccines are yet available in India, or even some of the Novavax kind of vaccines are not yet here. So I would say on that first strategy, we are partly there and partly we didn't make it. But overall, at least in terms of like having the technology, India, I think, it has succeeded there. The second piece was to incentivize Indian vaccine research, and the rollout of Covaxin as a completely indigenously developed vaccine is a positive thing. I think I'm happy to see that that's been rolled out, and several other Indian companies are still investing in developing other vaccine candidates. And we had anticipated that not everybody will succeed, and some of these will come online maybe in the second half of 2021. That would be a good thing as well. I think the part where this thing was put into doubt a little bit is that while incentivizing this research, I think the money may have been spread a little too thin. Too many candidates or too many companies that we were trying to get vaccines developed. And then the second was, I think there was an unnecessary controversy or confusion over whether the Covaxin had passed all the safety and efficacy stages of the trials prior to rollout. So I think that could have been avoided in terms of the Indian vaccine. Developing confidence through the kind of following the trial process would have been a better outcome. And Shambhavi, maybe you want to come in about the Covaxin approval process at this point.
Sure. It was a pretty opaque process, right? So we did not know who the subject expert committee members were who approved both Covaxin and Covishield. At that point of time, I think there was a lot of opacity over what emergency situation we were in, because obviously it wasn't as bad as it is now. On one hand, we were being told that, hey, COVID is going down, it's coming under control. On the other hand, we were being told that, hey, it's an emergency situation, so let's we need to get these vaccines out quickly. And therefore, even though there wasn't adequate phase 3 data, which was actually laid out in draft guidelines for vaccine approval that had been released last year, both the vaccines got approval, which I think caused a lot of controversy. I don't think anyone had any sort of hesitancy about the vaccine itself. I think it was more distrust in the process, and the fact that obviously we had a few governmental agencies which are working with the private sector to get these vaccines expedited. So I think it was more controversy around the process than the actual vaccine, but then a lot of it became politicized, which I think just kind of caused more chaos than helped along the way.
Yeah, I think that would have been an avoidable part, and maybe we could have focused a little bit more on when we wrote the document. In hindsight, maybe we could have focused more on the kind of approval process being transparent and direct. I think the third piece, Pranay, just to complete that thought, is on the facilitating vaccine manufacturing. This is the piece that I feel that has been neglected more than any others. I think in terms of attracting foreign companies, we in fact seem to have not attracted anyone to invest, even though we have such a large population that needs vaccine. A company like Pfizer, which otherwise has a lot of drugs and treatments available to Indians, has chosen not to come to India at this point. Or even a new company entrant like Moderna, who could have accessed the market, has chosen not to come here. I think there's been a lot of press around it, but the basics there are, I think, we were not seen. These companies are essentially supplying to a lot of different countries, and they were going to go and supply the vaccine where it was the easiest for them to do business. And I don't see that India made it easy for these approvals. I mean, granted, bridging trials and those kinds of requirements do exist, but I think there could have been a better job on getting in touch with these companies and getting ahead of some of the other countries that secured access. I think there was a competition there, and I don't think our initiatives were sufficient to facilitate manufacturing, either domestically increase the manufacturing through investments. I think the capital investments with existing manufacturers were non-existent, as well as attracting foreign manufacturers. We didn't do a great job of it. And I think that's kind of showing up in the fact that we have had a slower start to vaccinations, and the numbers of vaccines that we need versus what we are capable of manufacturing at this point is still a mismatch that greatly worries us.
That's right. I think a related point, Mihir, is about vaccine procurement, right? And there was a section in the document where I think primarily you had suggested about creating a model contract, one that includes dispute resolution guarantees or terms for partnerships, terms for technology transfer, etc. And I think this is the big missing part, right? Like we don't even know what is the exact terms, and I have advanced purchase orders being placed and things like that, right? So what do you think went wrong here? Because I do think there is many things that went wrong here. And second, are there any corrective actions that can be taken now in order to rectify whatever that happened?
Pranay, I think that's a great question, and in fact, this is a part that we were quite concerned about in terms of government dominating the procurement side of it. I think in terms of the model contract, we had included dispute resolution guarantees, we had included indemnity related concerns, we had included potentially the option for it to be a tripartite agreement with the government and an Indian company signing agreement with the technology provider, and so on. I think the reality played out pretty poorly for us. I'll just cite a couple of examples. I think one is that both Serum Institute and Bharat Biotech demanded indemnity from the government. Serum was, I think, sued by a participant in their trials for some side effects, and I think it was an uncertainty that could have been done without. The fact that we are dealing with brand new technology, this is a virus that's brand new and the vaccine's brand new, and we have everything has been accelerated worldwide in order to get the treatment, get the vaccines out there, and some sort of indemnity clause or some sort of legal protection for the manufacturer was necessary. I don't think it was our argument that defects in manufacturing or failure to adhere to good manufacturing practices would be something that they would be indemnified. And neither did the manufacturers ask for that. I think what the manufacturers would have been happy with would have been limited indemnities for the basic technology itself being so new. They would have benefited from that. So I think we failed in getting that out to them. I think the second part we had kind of said in the model contracts was essentially we know that this demand does exist. I mean, even if you kind of go back to the essential first or the demography first, we knew we needed at least 100 to 200 million doses within a few months after the vaccines got approved, maybe within 2 or 3 months. But if you look at the actual numbers, the government of India's first order, official order, and from what I have found, to Serum Institute was for 11 million doses in January, and to Bharat Biotech was 5.5 million. It has since then been increased. I think another 150 million doses have been ordered. But I think if you look at that 11 million doses for a population of our size and an essential first population itself needing 60, 70 million, I think that order went in too late and it was too small, if that indeed is the truth. And just by way of comparison, the United Kingdom had, as early as August, already secured about 150 million doses across three providers. The United States had secured 400 million doses, and the EU had secured about a billion doses across multiple providers. So if you kind of look at the populations of the UK, US, and EU, they had essentially secured across the 3 or 4 providers that they chose, they had secured enough vaccines for their entire population. And as a result, we are seeing, for example, in the US, vaccinations on track and they're going to be done by May or June. And in the UK, they have completed the first doses for a very large percent of population. So I would say that these countries took a big risk. They spent a lot of money on ordering these hundreds of millions of doses. But that risk paid off in the sense that they are going to have a large percentage of population vaccinated. And at least for the time being, while the vaccines are effective under the current strains, they seem to have moved past that. I think our orders are too small, our contracts were too small. That I think is a big failure, and a failure to kind of give the sufficient amount of indemnity in the contracts, as well as protect our companies from litigation from their partners on the government's part, I think is also something that we need to address potentially. Because as you have seen, probably there are headlines that Serum got a legal notice from AstraZeneca for failing to deliver certain volumes of vaccines. I think all of that kind of was avoidable, and we had kind of said some of those things in the procurement related legal contracts. So I feel like the government's ability to act nimbly and make contracts that are friendly to the providers was put to test, and unfortunately, it didn't seem to have worked.
That's true. I mean, from a public policy angle, it is quite perplexing that this happened. I mean, when you have low state capacity, generally the exercises which have many transactions, many lakhs of transactions, are difficult to do. But transactions which are much smaller, done with a small number of people, a small number of parties, manufacturers, is easier to do. But it's surprising that we were not able to get those things right. And I don't know, what about the corrective actions, Mihir? What can be done now?
I think what can be done now still is to include transparency in the contracts, and we'll talk more about it when we come to the pricing and all the different prices that have been in the press recently. I think a big part would be for the government to clearly and boldly advertise that they have placed orders for hundreds of millions of doses. Clearly, kind of say, put out the delivery plans agreed to, maybe even put out in the public domain whether now the government has put in 4,500 crores, which even now to me seems small for expanding capacity at these manufacturers. Because we had estimated even for the cheapest doses of the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine, which is now being sold as Covishield, we had estimated about 50,000 crores of government outlay. And I think the government insisting on delivery first or going in small orders kind of would have not been sufficient for the manufacturers. So I think even the 4,500 crores is a relatively small amount. I would say the government can really, and I'm not kind of saying that corporates are kind of should not. Serum announced that they invested their own money. The Gates Foundation, for God's sake, invested more in the early stages in expanding Serum's capacity than the government of India did. So I would say making a bold bet on a proven vaccine at this point and committing to a certain amount of order volume would, I think, provide a lot of confidence. I think on the indemnity and other pieces, maybe they are a little bit in history now, given that millions of these doses have been already administered in India and elsewhere. So I think some of those are relatively lower concerns. But I would say investing in capacity and providing working capital and clearances and those kinds of things can still be done.
Right. Yeah, and I think India can easily seek strength in its numbers on this count, right? Because if the government would have said or goes now and says that we are going to procure so many hundreds of millions of doses, then it actually becomes more lucrative for any global company to direct their produce towards India rather than anywhere else. So we are actually at an advantage here if the government wants to play it so, right? Okay, now let's go to the next stage. And next stage was about choosing the delivery channel. And there we had a very interesting point about trying to use the election commission machinery to quickly distribute vaccines. Obviously, that didn't happen, and the government has chosen the state government health machinery, public health machinery for this exercise. And I think that hasn't gone that badly, right? So, Shambhavi, what do you think went better or what went worse in this count?
I think the election commission machinery would have been useful if we had all of those doses manufactured for a quick rollout of the vaccines. With the limited supplies coming in, it made sense to have the state governments more involved in getting the vaccines out. I think at the local level that has worked very well. For example, in my village, the ASHA workers went around creating lists of people who were eligible for vaccination. And then, because she herself had got the vaccine by the time, as a healthcare worker, by the time they started giving it to others, there was more confidence because you were seeing a person who had got the vaccine and was roaming around. And so there was an increased trust in that activity. So I think that kind of worked fairly well. Obviously, now that has got derailed a bit because of the lack of vaccines and now the decision to kind of give it off to state governments completely.
Yeah, and I think one more thing that happened after a few months was just opening this up to the private hospitals. So I guess that also was something that we'd recommended as well, and that it was good to see that play out. That sort of reduced the burden on just one channel, right? So you had multiple channels opening up, which was something that we recommended as well.
Multiple distribution channels, yes.
Yes. Right. So let's go to the next part and we'll come to the pricing part towards the end. But Shambhavi, I remember when we were writing this document, you and Ameya had emphasized the need for post-market surveillance, which simply means that basically we need to check what happens to people after getting the vaccines and what should be done as a corrective measure, etc. Right. So where are we on that? Has post-market surveillance happened? Because we don't even know whether a database is maintained. I remember we had a big discussion on whether Aadhaar should be used or whether you need some other documents to at least track the repercussions of people taking the vaccines. And that obviously it has not happened There's no need for Aadhaar. There you can upload any document and go for a vaccination. So what has happened? How has that played out? Is post-market surveillance happening? Are we seeing some results come out of that?
Right. So let me just put that together. So we are recommended that anyone can get the vaccine, but we should also maintain a database for which you need a national identity card to make sure that your details are correctly put in. So what has happened is, and what usually happens when we have vaccination drives, is that all recipients of the vaccines are made to wait for 30 minutes to see if there are any adverse events following immunization. And then after 30 minutes, you can go. What we had advised was that let's not do that because this is a completely novel vaccine that has not been trialed as extensively as others. So let's do a follow up call before after you get the first dose of the vaccine and before you have to go to the second dose, and also create a helpline in case you have any issues in the days following getting the vaccine. That follow up I don't think has happened, so we're doing the 30-minute wait thing to see if there are any immediate sort of allergic reactions, but follow-ups after that are not proactive follow-ups after that are not happening. We do have a the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare does come out with reports on adverse events following immunizations. As of 29th March, we had 617 such events. But again, there's a lot of opacity around what's counted. I think the complete documents were available only for 35 out of these events that have happened. And if you compare this with other countries, which have been far more transparent with adverse reactions to vaccinations, I think we have done a slightly poor job. We've recently seen, for example, a lot of countries suspending use of AstraZeneca in certain groups because of blood clots. Now, I'm not commenting whether that decision was correct or not, but it just helps build credibility in the vaccine when you have transparent data available on the effects that vaccine have. And then obviously you can make a more informed decision on taking a particular vaccine because you know what is possible. I don't like calling them side effects because say getting fever or getting pain in your arm is an effect of the vaccine, and it's a natural reaction of your body. So you can then make that trade off for yourself and make a more informed decision. But again, we need a lot more transparency in what's happening in India following both Covaxin and Covishield vaccinations.
That's right. And I should mention here that the word post market surveillance itself is a medical term, because I remember a lot of people saying that, oh, you're talking about surveillance, and is that meant to track people and their habits or whatever, right?
Yeah, we changed it to monitoring, I think.
Yeah,
Monitoring.
yeah, I remember. So, yeah, so now getting back to the pricing problem. So, Mihir, you were discussing this before we started this episode. What do you think about the pricing angle?
Yeah, I think Pranay, this is always a concern because there is obviously there is a clear indication that the vaccine is a necessity for a large percentage of the population to be to develop enough resistance to avoid extreme adverse events that the virus causes. And I think a lot of the vaccines have been proven to do so. While they may not be 100% effective at preventing infections, they are very, very good at preventing severe outcomes that either debilitating outcomes or unfortunate deaths that are occurring. So I think in that sense, there's a lot of issues around price because if you think about price for such an item, it's not an kind of ordinary and simple economics decision. There's a lot of emotion that gets attached and a lot of controversy. I would say, at least in terms of, for example, I'll just begin this discussion on the price by simply saying some things. For example, developed economy like the United States has chosen to make the vaccination entirely free for all of its population. That includes the cost of the vaccine itself as well as the cost of administration. And I mean that's one thing for a rich country to do, to basically say that everyone will get it for free, because compared to the size of their economy and the contribution that an active participant in the economy makes, the cost of vaccination for them was relatively small, and therefore, like from a purely trade-off or a returns on investment perspective, getting everybody vaccinated, even at the cost of the public exchequer, was a good decision in the sense that the economy has jumped back into action and so on. The same arguments are also being made in many other countries. I think in India there has been enough pressure on the government to make it free, and we in fact advocated that that could be one approach as well. But one problem with that entire approach is that unless it goes unless the vaccination is very fast and helps the economy, we will run into this situation where people are getting reinfected or we need revaccinations and the cost continues to go up without the economic returns on it. And I think different economies have different performances. So I don't necessarily think that the vaccine should be free. The part that is generating controversy as of today is that the price that the different purchasers pay for the vaccine is being debated. So I think Serum Institute announced. I mean, the government of India had disclosed earlier that their first order in January, I think the 11 million doses, was placed at a discounted price of 150 rupees per dose. And subsequently, also Serum Institute has priced it relatively lower for the central government. I think it's either 150 rupees or a 250 rupee price per dose for the central government. As of today, what the central government is saying is they will procure 50% of the vaccines at that price. And Serum Institute put out a press release earlier today saying that the price to the state governments, which have now been allowed to procure and distribute vaccines on their own, the Serum Institute's price for the state governments is 400 rupees. And for private entities, it is 600 rupees per dose. So I think the key question there is that the different governments will pay different prices and private entities will pay a different price. And when there is such price discrimination or difference in price that different entities pay, there is always controversy. Now, what we think about it, we can debate, but I wanted to put the facts in front of you. I think more than the price, the speed of delivery is, I think, what I would focus more on. But unfortunately, since we didn't lock in the contract price, I mean, my sense of it is that the governments that locked in hundreds of millions of doses would have signed a contract that said, if the vaccine passes through 3 stages of trials, we will buy 100 million doses, and this is the price we pay per dose. Since India doesn't seem to have done that, we have been kind of buying vaccines in smaller batches of 10 million or 50 million or whatever. I think the chance to procure the vaccine at a much lower price by committing to a large volume was there and wasn't taken. And I think that just means that I mean, if you look at it from the manufacturer's perspective, their ability to kind of lock in a certain order volume allows them to make the necessary investments in raw material, in manufacturing equipment, in hiring the right staff, and so on. And the fact that we didn't do so will automatically impact the price that now is being charged for smaller orders by the different state governments. So I'm not kind of saying that Serum Institute price list. I wouldn't look at it. I mean, a lot of people are commenting on it from an ethical perspective. I would say it's a practical business thing for a company to put that out there, but all of it could have been avoided if with a large contract that would have been signed early on, and even now can be avoided with certain transparency.
Yeah, I would agree. I would start, my view on this would be to say that, yeah, right now the priority, as you said, is about getting the maximum number of people vaccinated in the shortest possible time. And whichever way is possible for that, we need to do, right? So there's no point in being hung up on only priced at zero or market price plus direct benefit transfer. We need probably everything, right? We need to throw everything that we have at it. That's the first point. And I guess the fact that the price at zero approach which government followed has led us to a path where we have only procured such a small quantity of vaccine itself shows that we need to open up other channels so that we can accelerate the path, right? I mean, how do we expect the government to suddenly change track from what it was doing now and throw in a huge number and try to vaccinate everyone on its own through its centers? It seems quite unreasonable. So from that lens, I don't think price is the most significant issue at this point. Now, a sub point to that is, I guess, the big issue here in the issue of the day we are talking about is about how different governments can have different prices. And yeah, that I would agree to. And I guess that's a breakdown of our federal negotiation system. If we had a way that all or at least some of the states could jointly put together some or purchase orders to Bharat Biotech or to Serum Institute, then you would automatically see the price come down, right? Because you have already committed for a advanced order. So I guess that is still something which can happen now, right? Instead of having these flat prices, if states could come together and strike a bargain with the vaccine providers, it would help. The third angle, and I remember we had a lot of debate on this. We had actually debated about three strategies: one, priced at zero; second, market price with a direct benefit transfer; and the third one was purely market price, right? So I guess for the newer vaccines which might come up, maybe Johnson and Johnson. I don't know whether it will now even come to India, but say Pfizer, Moderna, etc., which were at that point of time very costly. I guess it's okay for the government to allow a market priced regime just so that overall we can at least get to numbers that we want vaccinated as quickly as possible. I know that there are equity arguments in this, but that equity arguments cannot override the public health imperative at this point. To ensure equity, what we need to do is have a government channel which is giving doses at free, keep that running throughout, which I hope the government does, so that we are at least giving subsidy and we are giving a direct benefit transfer to people who really need it, instead of being really vocal about the fact that it should be free for everyone, right? I mean, I'm sure a large number of people in India just want to get vaccinated as soon as possible, rather than worry whether they are going to pay 400 or 600 or 0 rupees. So that needs to be the priority as of now. What do you think, Shambhavi?
Yeah, I think it should be left up to people to figure out what to make sure all the channels are available for them to choose book your vaccine. So one of the arguments that I have seen again and again is that hey, only the rich are going to get the vaccine. But and I think we had spoken about this back when we were writing that document as well. That perhaps Pfizer and Moderna vaccines are so expensive that they are not well suited for mass vaccination campaigns. Again, their cold chain requirements are also different. And so perhaps they are not vaccines that might be ideal for the government to buy, but obviously they can be made available in the market through private channels, and people who can purchase them can purchase and take them. And then you concentrate on, say, Covaxin and Covishield for mass vaccination campaigns. And I'm not exactly sure why this has not happened yet, because then it kind of makes sure that the government can prioritize people who might not be able to afford the vaccine to get it, and not unnecessarily burden itself trying to make sure that the vaccine is available at a low cost for everybody, especially those who can afford to get the vaccine or pay for the vaccine, right? So I think the equity question sometimes gets a little confusing because we conflate it with only the rich getting the vaccine and the poor not, but we kind of tend to forget the fact that it is still the cost has to be borne by somebody. It is not a free versus a paid argument, right? And eventually, this will impact social services. This will impact the same very people we are trying to get equitable access to. So, letting those who can pay for the vaccine to pay for it might actually, in the long term, help us get equity in some other aspects of the healthcare services that we are providing.
Yeah, I think there are two legitimate points there to what Shambhavi said. I mean, one is that the more people that are vaccinated, there's a positive externality associated with it. So, in the sense that even if somebody is willing to pay to get vaccinated, not only are they generating private value in terms of having been vaccinated, they're also generating a public externality which says if this person's vaccinated, they're less likely or unlikely to unlikely to transmit further or get sick and put a burden on the health system. And then second is as a fully vaccinated person, they can become economic agents again, fully participating in the economy. So that's a positive side of getting people vaccinated as quickly as possible. I think Shambhavi and Pranay, the part where I think there are legitimate arguments or legitimate concerns around vaccine access is that when there is a channel where the provider, whether it's Serum or Bharat Biotech or some other provider, is making a higher profit versus a channel where they're not making that profit with the government of India's price, is there a danger that the manufacturer will allocate a disproportionate amount of the early supplies to the paid channel, let's say, for example, if they're making 600 rupees a dose with the private hospitals and only 150 with the central government, the incentives are such that Serum might say that we will supply. I mean, any manufacturer is likely to be tempted to supply more quickly to the side that's paying more. And I think that's a legitimate issue in terms of access, because as we have seen, different states have had different levels of the pandemic at different times and would benefit from a faster vaccination rate versus certain states that could tolerate a slower vaccination rate on account of a lower spread. So I think there are those issues, because this is the time value of getting vaccinated quickly is not fully captured by the price, and that I think is a legitimate concern.
I agree, and I think this is something that we'll most likely now see play out with states fighting each other. uh, States with higher purchasing power might actually kind of put in a little bit more extra as temptation. We actually saw this in the US last year with purchase of masks because of their state-led system of purchasing. We saw places where there was lesser bureaucracy and where people who would quickly add on like 50 cents per mask to an order, pick up masks even though they might not have had that much spread of the disease back then. So that is one thing that is likely to play out. But again, I think that for that precise reason, we should have kind of considered increasing the menu of vaccines which are available in India beyond these two, and then kind of using that to create enough competition to both bring down the prices and increase supply and make sure that equitable supply was available.
That's right. So, all right. So, we've covered a lot of ground here. I want to end this episode on a slightly different note. Did you think that what are the things actually that went right and the government actually managed it quite well? And probably you had misjudged while the document was being created almost 8, 9 months back. So, Mihir, I'll start with you.
Yeah, I think, first, I would like to acknowledge that this is a very, very tough public policy challenge, and there can be a lot of different opinions about it. What I think the government managed well was, one is that the government was able to kind of get the vaccination rolled out very quickly. I mean, imagine that the vaccines went through phase 3 trials. We're still in trials when we were writing the document in September. And by January, doses were in people's arms, and we now have, as Shambhavi said, 17 million people vaccinated. Even though we think it's too small in the face of the challenge, just the fact that the CoWIN system has been put in place, there are ways of authenticating people and getting them in for a second dose. The fact that people can get information through the portal and otherwise. I think a lot of the things are very unusual for an Indian government-led effort to be able to procure something on the scale of tens of millions, distribute it through a cold chain across the country, have an IT backbone that supports it, and get the priority population actually kind of signed up and accessing it. So I think from a distribution standpoint, even though the speed is slower, the fact that all this infrastructure has been put in place and is working means that once the vaccines become available, we can rely on it to kind of go quicker. I think that went well. One part, Pranay, and I'll be honest here, is that I feel like we misjudged is I think a lot of research now has shown that many two-dose vaccines, even after the first dose, have a significant impact in terms of the mortality as well as other adverse outcomes. So one of the things we were presuming, or at least I was presuming when we prepared the document, was that the two-dose vaccines will have a very strict regimen of first dose followed a few weeks later by the second dose that needed to be followed rigorously. But from a public health perspective, what I have seen is that in some countries, what they have done is changed the protocol and delayed the second dose in the interest of getting the first dose to more people. And that has actually had a significant impact on the public health outcome. So I would say one of the things I would say that there was a misjudgment is in trusting that the protocol had to be followed exactly in terms of the number of weeks after which to get the second dose. And we should be aware, and maybe even the government needs to get expertise on board to see that if the first dose first strategy works well in terms of public health outcomes, maybe the second doses could be delayed as for a large section of the population. And Shambhavi, maybe the science of it is more clear to you.
Yeah, so I think there's more and more data coming out that delaying the second dose by up to 12 weeks, I think that's the longest time that has been tested, is actually more useful in terms of increasing efficacy. I think it is still, I think the data is still to be peer reviewed, but yeah, I think 8 to 10 weeks has become the norm now for the second dose, and getting more people vaccinated with the first dose at least. I agree with you, Mir. I think the rollout, in whatever capacity that it started, was good. I think the on ground conditions that were maintained, social distancing, for example, information that was given, the consent mechanisms were pretty good. I don't share your confidence in the COVID app, maybe because of my little bit of experience of having spoken to a few ASHA workers in rural parts of Maharashtra, where the app did not seem to work very well, and they kind of use ledgers to follow up with people. It's obviously also easier in a community-driven scenario to where you know people personally, like everyone that who comes to vaccination is someone that you know. It's easier to just probably to maintain it in a physical book rather than depend on technology in a place where you probably don't have electricity for half the time. So I think COVID did give some problems initially, at least, but hopefully it will be improved for following follow up activities. I think we also did fairly well in getting the vaccines through approval. There was controversy around it, obviously, but I think for a long time it was better to have a yes rather than be in that state of limbo for that we were in December on when it will get approved and what would happen next. So I think in terms of getting it off the ground, we were fairly good. But let's see how well we do in keeping it in the air. Pranay, what do you think?
Yeah, Shambhavi, I guess one thing that sort of we misjudged, and probably that has played out not that bad, is just the utilization of the public health system for the vaccine distribution. I think we'd recommended election commission, assuming that we will be vaccinating a really large number of people at simultaneously, and for that we need a huge machinery. But the way it played out with limited supplies, etc., I think this mechanism of using the state health machinery sort of played out reasonably well once it was coupled with private hospitals also being allowed. So I guess that was one interesting learning from all this experience. Other than that, I agree with both of you on what played out well and what we could have learned better. Right. So this was a reflective episode. Good to know your thoughts. And I guess I'll end this episode now just by saying that the science figured out a lot of things for us, which we were sort of circumspect when we were writing that document. And the fact that vaccines came out very quickly, and that to a large number of vaccines, not just one or two, that itself was a very positive sign. And now the question really is about distribution, public policy. How do we quickly get it to a large number of people, right? And that would probably help us tide over this. And the experiences from some other countries which have managed to do this are positive and make us hopeful of solving this challenge as well. So with this, I'll just end by saying that, whenever the vaccine is available to you, please go and get vaccinated as soon as possible. Don't worry about X or Y, but the real point is about getting vaccinated as soon as possible. So with that, I'll end this episode, and we link our document towards in this description. Please do check it out, and if you have any comments, do send it back to us. Thank you.
The Takshashila Institution is an independent, non-partisan think tank and a school of public policy. We have education programs lasting 1 semester and 1 year that are tailored specifically for people like you. They are all online and you can take them from anywhere. Admissions are now open for our 12-week graduate certificate program in public policy, defense and foreign affairs, technology policy, and health and life sciences. Visit takshashila.org.in/courses to find out more. If you liked our show, don't forget to check out other interesting podcasts on the IVM network. You can tune into them on the IVM Podcast app, ivmpodcast.com, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. You can also follow IVM on social media. The handle is @IVM Podcasts on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And hey, if you'd like to dive into Takshashila's research on technology, strategy, and economic affairs, check us out at our Twitter handle @TakshashilaINST or our website takshashila.org.in.
I hope you enjoyed that show. If you aren't following us on social media, please do. We're IVM Podcasts on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. We'd like to thank the sponsors on the network this week, thewholetruthfoods.com, Seat, PayPal, and Cred. We thank you all for your support. Tune into The Note, where Maruk Inayat talks to Dr. Bipin Joshi about the second wave of COVID. He calls it no less than World War III. On The Habit Coach, Ashton was joined by Yoshita Dave, who's a sex educator and intimacy coach. On Paisa Vaisa, Anupam Gupta was joined by Amit Thakkar and Hiral Jain of Market Pulse Technologies, and they talked about trading in Indian markets. All Things Policy by the Takshashila Institute had on board Mihir Mahajan and Pranay Kotastane to talk about the recent changes in the Indian intellectual property front. You should definitely check out the Cyrus Says episode with Ace casting director Mukesh Chabra. They discussed some of his best work. We also had Ira Mukoti, who has authored various books on history and mythology from a female gaze. The IPL season's in full swing, and we have Edges and Sledges in English and Khel Niti in Hindi if you want to check out cricket content. Really, really great conversations on both of those shows. Do check those out. And with that, I hope to see you again next week.
Namaskar, dear friends. My name is Ashish Vidyarthi. Life, as you know, is a journey. And you and I, travelers, how can we celebrate this travel? I have a podcast for you, Begin the Journey. I share stories and moments from my life. Do tune in every Monday and Thursday to listen to my podcast on the IVM Podcast website, app, or wherever you get your podcast from. Cheers.